Welcome, everyone. I'm Akosh. I'm the host of Airtime Webinars, which is a bi-weekly series of discussions with research and product leaders about the nitty-gritty details of building products. Today, I have the pleasure of talking to Caitlin Sullivan about where to use AI in the UX research process and in the product discovery process in general. What you need to know about Caitlin is that she's the founder of User Research Studio, which is a founder and customer discovery advisory. Caitlin, I please help me out later on to explain what that is. I think it's very exciting, but I let you unpack it in 1 minute. All of you who are out there, I already see a bunch of people tuned in. I'd love to hear firstly if audio, video, everything works fine. Where are you tuning in from? And you may see my favorite bookshelf in the back. If there's a book that you really like, put it in the chat. I'd love to know which one is the most popular out there. All right. So back to Caitlin. Caitlin is what you also need to know is that Caitlin is a UX research expert with over a decade of experience working with companies like ManyPads or Soundtrack Your Brand. She has founded 2 businesses, one of which she sold in 2023. She is also one of the few AI literate professionals in the UX field. And before we kick off our discussions, there are a few technicalities. If you've seen any Airtime webinars, you know them by heart, I guess. But let me just reiterate it for everyone. So first of all, if you want to get the latest webinar recordings, watch the past episodes of Airtime webinars, you can do that by following us on Spotify or on YouTube. I'm going to post the links in the comments. Secondly, this is very important. If you have any questions for Caitlin, you don't have to wait until the Q&A in the end. Throw them in the comments during our discussion, and I'll make sure that we cover them latest in the Q&A. Okay? And my last point is that if you want to do a background check or Caitlin or myself, then you're more than free to do that. The best source is LinkedIn. And I'm just going to put our LinkedIn profiles, the links to our LinkedIn profiles in the chat as well. All right. I think I talked long enough. Caitlin, it's my pleasure and honor to have you here. You're the first one. You're my first guest in 2025. And
cool.
Maybe let's just kick off things with hearing a little bit about yourself, what you do, what you're focused on these days.
Well, what I'm focused on is easy. I mean, it's like AI, everything. But so my background, just very briefly, I've worked across marketing, UX design, and research. So it hasn't been all kind of just focused on user research since day one, though I've done customer research across all of the different roles that I've had, which is kind of what landed me doing consulting in the end after working at a scale up in Stockholm. So I've worked in 3 countries, done a whole bunch of different types of research. And then when AI kind of took the main stage, we could say, I had this real moment like, oh, this is like the internet starting, this is probably not going away. And it's just going to become more and more prevalent, more and more dominant until we can't really avoid it at all. So I would say I didn't super quickly jump on that bandwagon. And I'm the person who still has like an iPhone 12 and is not an early adopter with pretty much anything.
I have an iPhone 12, the small one too, just to put it out
there.
So
I'm not like the cool kid who immediately jumps on tech stuff. So for me to fairly quickly, not immediately, but fairly quickly recognize that AI was kind of a big thing and I should try to understand this was actually unusual behavior for me. But I did it partly because I figured, I was getting a lot of questions from clients about using AI and whether I trusted it and what I would recommend. And I sort of needed to be able to adapt to that and answer those questions for my clients. But then I started a newsletter because I continued getting questions from fellow researchers, from designers, people feeling rather lost, like kind of drowning in all of this AI news and not really knowing what to make of it, how to start, whether they should invest time in learning AI tools and so on.
Amazing. And all these questions from your clients about AI tools is the perfect segue to the first topic I would like to cover with you, because if I'm not mistaken, you tested over 70 AI tools around product discovery. What I'd love to understand is, was there like a pivotal moment? You were getting all these inquiries from various directions. Was there a moment in a meeting, anything memorable that you realized, okay, now I just gonna make it into a newsletter. I have to professionalize this, and I have to make it something bigger than just experimenting.
I don't think it was a single moment, but I think at a certain point, I put out like I put out a pretty early collection of ChatGPT prompts. And looking back on it now, it's a real cringe moment because it was horrible. But there was so much interest in that. I got over 2,500 downloads of this really quickly. I was giving it away for free for a while, and then I was selling it. But there was so much interest, and I got so many follow-up questions from that, just from other people who, you know, I connected with on LinkedIn and also via client companies, that it was clear to me that there was just so many unanswered questions, and no one was really looking at this from the lens of having done a lot of customer research and being able to evaluate these tools well from experience and so on. So it wasn't a single moment. It was like the buildup of all of these signals that I was getting over time. And actually, it was maybe the closest thing to a moment was a friend, Ben, who is a very experienced both quant and qual researcher himself. And he said to me at some point, like, why aren't you diving full force into this? Because you're kind of the only person who's talking about this stuff or really diving into it the way that you are. So I think there was a combination of signals from kind of all sides, I would say.
Yeah, like some authors, they have this habit, or let's not call it habit, but they make it a rule that there's a certain number of pages that they need to write every week. When you think about testing tools, do you have a rule like that for yourself, that like every week I want to see 2 new tools or test new tools, or are you more opportunistic and test tools as they come in your field of vision?
I have tried to do that. I It's really hard. I think you have kids. I have a very young child, so I will say from my world is not that predictable on a week to week basis. I would love to be able to test like 12 tools per week, but whether I actually have the hours to do that around client work is not a given. So instead of the number of tools, I try to keep a running list of the things that I feel I need to learn. So for a long time at the beginning, it was like prompting. I need to understand how to prompt. Can I reduce hallucinations? How? What can I do to affect them? What are all of the ways, like, what are all of the things that do affect hallucinations? And how many of
Mhm.
them do I have control over as a non-developer, not fine-tuning models, things like that. So I have a running list of things like that. Sometimes it's as simple as I need my note taker to do X, Y, and Z. I need to learn how to get it to do that. Can I modify the one that I have? Which other tools already advertise that they do this better? And then it's just like, okay, I'm going to test these tools that say they do that and run an analysis of the 4 tools against each other and try to do that by the end of the week. But it's really rarely these days an actual number of tools. It's more like concrete outcomes that I'm trying to achieve.
Yeah. All right. Now let's talk a little bit about your learnings, because we could unpack so many things here, also from what you said. But let's focus first on the top areas in the product discovery process where you found AI to be like A, reliable, and B, an invaluable support. Okay, and
Mm.
what I'm also interested in is if you can like draw or find a common denominator which is underlying these positive experiences, why AI is particularly suitable for these use cases.
So the first one, I think, is the one that the most people I have talked to have tried themselves, and that is preparing for research. I think, like, AI just has a wealth of, access to a wealth of data, right? And so it's been trained on so much information that has the best practices for writing, research protocols, plans, stakeholder meeting documents, things like that. I think that part of the research process is pretty well established as something that AI can do well based on the set of skills or like the way that AI and large language models, generative AI works. So in particular, I would give an example. So I tend to do a lot of like pricing and packaging research, or I have in the past. And I've been
Mhm.
doing a pricing packaging research project with a client in the last couple of months. And I know what good questions look like for pricing research. So I can look at it and be a judge. But for a moment, I looked at the protocol that I had used previously and modified it for this client. And I thought, is this good enough? Like, why don't I just see what AI comes up with? And so I fed Claude, in this case, all of my expectations, my needs, the requirements, the limitations around this project, like as much context as I could within the limitations of, my agreement with my client. I got approval from
Yep.
this client to use AI in the process in the first place, to be clear. And the interview script it spit out was better than mine, like, to be
Wow.
completely honest. So it phrased certain questions in a way that actually kind of encapsulated multiple questions from mine in a much better way without losing any of the context that I was digging for. Had some follow-up questions that I hadn't thought of. So it can do a very good job. Not always, and you need to know how to prompt it. And I had a very detailed series of prompts to get there, but it didn't take a lot of steps. It was like 2 prompts in a row, and then I had an interview script that was better.
It's staggering. No, like you've been a
Yeah.
researcher for a long time, and yes, the entire internet is there for these AI tools to learn from. But at the same time, you have very, very relevant, specific experience in this particular field of pricing
Right.
and packaging.
But then it's also kind of like my knowledge, my experience, my lens on the world can also have biases and be limited, right? I can accidentally end up having a bit of tunnel vision based on the way I've done things in the past, what I think I've seen work best based on my experience. And AI just like takes a more open-minded approach in a case like that. So I
Yeah.
did use that interview script and I did get really good results, and it kind of verified for me, yes, AI is like, this is the 50th test I've done getting AI to help me with interview protocols. But in this case, it was so interesting because pricing research and packaging research is one of those areas where most people feel really insecure. Not a lot of people are experts at that kind of research. So the idea that AI can help there is pretty interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So preparing for interviews and specifically getting your discussion guide ready, or the questions ready for the interviews, were there any other fields and any other steps of the research process where you felt blown away with what you got from an AI tool?
So I actually just launched a course on Maven on analysis, synthesis, and reporting, because this kind of like the second half or the back half of the research process is traditionally some of the most time consuming, right? So we spend so much time on analysis, trying to get it right, trying not to leave any thread unpulled. And many user researchers are pretty afraid of like using AI for that part of the process, because we're all afraid of like leaving some stone unturned, and that happens to be the stone that had the best opportunity, would have made the most difference, and so on. There's a real risk of that. I absolutely
Yeah.
acknowledge that. But I've found in like a lot of meticulous testing with various tools. I mean, I've used Airtime, I've tested it. I use large language models, probably still more than anything else directly. But like, if the prompting is really good, if you know the kind of tactics, how to go about communicating with AI in the best way for the task, you can get such better stuff out of it than what I see if I'm kind of peeking over the shoulder of fellow designers and researchers who are like, I've tried a lot of things and I'm still not getting really high quality results. Or when I compare things side by side, AI really only got 50% of what I got when I ran my own manual analysis. And I understand that in some contexts, it can be trickier and trickier to uncover little kind of tiny nuanced details that make a difference. But I've gotten results like just recently in retesting stuff to prepare for my course, a test I did with Claude doing thematic analysis, uncovered every single one of the insights that I had identified, plus two more themes that were like sub themes that I hadn't really seen as their own things. And that's okay.
Yeah.
But I really appreciated that Claude took a different perspective. It,
Would you
it saw
would
these as sub
yeah.
themes.
Would you have taken the leap of faith of not doing your own analysis and synthesis, but just use Claude or whatever other tool out there and say, okay,
Yeah.
well, maybe it missed something, but maybe, and let's not talk about you, but when anybody we're doing research, well, we're also humans, right? We also miss things and don't see themes. So would you
Yeah.
have taken this leap of faith of saying, okay, I'm not doing it manually any longer, but I'm just feeding that to a tool to find the
So
themes?
I have already taken that leap of faith with multiple
Okay.
projects, but in cases where the risk is not super high, if there's like, in cases where you're, the team is deciding to make a huge investment in something like a completely new product, or switching audiences entirely, things like that pose a huge risk to the business, potentially to the customer if they're going to be kind of underserved because they're suddenly deprioritized, whatever it is. You risk lots of customers churning, affecting revenue, these sort of things. I think we have to be pretty careful around high risk scenarios and just handing everything to AI. Where the risk is like medium, I think we can play around a little bit more. And, but again, I've grown my own confidence in using AI, knowing how my prompting abilities, the way that I approach it, affects the output. So now I'm at the point where I'm like, I have a handle on this. I know how to probe it and continue the conversation in a way that kind of double and triple checks whether any stones have been left unturned.
Listen,
And I think, you know, it's also a matter of which tools you're using, like whether it's, a tool like yours where you get specific kind of like really focus on certain areas that are relevant to you in the way that you do research, or whether they're on the wrong level of specificity for you. So
yep,
that takes a little bit
yep.
of testing or just knowledge through talking to other people as well.
And I think one of the very important points that I'm picking up that you mentioned is that your ability to prompt and check the results and go back, it affects the quality that you get from a particular tool. So we shouldn't be just
Yeah.
thinking about, is AI reliable or not, but what's my input that is increasing that reliability and my confidence level that what I got back is good or is good. Is a
Yeah.
good
I mean,
analysis.
you can speak to this more too, but I mean, I've talked to a lot of founders of these tools as well. I've had so many demos and conversations with people to try to understand more about how their tool works in comparison to others. And I mean, in the back end of most of these kind of tailor-made research tools is also just really good prompting. Not just, right? Like it's actually not a small thing that I want to downplay. It's teams of people working very hard to find exactly the right sequencing of prompts to get you from A to B without you having to put in the work. So either
Yeah.
way, it's really good prompting. And there are lots of voices out there saying, like, you don't need to learn prompting in 2025, do this instead. But in the end, it's kind of actually a series of learning how to think very clearly, learning how to identify all of the little steps of your own process workflow way of seeing things, building a kind of standard operating procedure around that for yourself, and then learning how to give it to AI.
Yeah. There's a bunch of questions, by the way, about prompting from the audience. I'd like to
Yeah,
take those questions as a separate topic in the Q&A section. So we're gonna get back to that. How do you go about AI models being non-deterministic? So does it have you tried like running the same prompt on a series of interviews to see what kind of variations you get in the themes and in the analysis? And if you've done
yeah,
that, what was your experience?
yeah. So I think the topic of testing in general is really important. I've tried to go about it as systematically as I can, but as you said, like, you get different responses every time, and it becomes really difficult to test. I test this in ChatGPT on a Monday, and on a Tuesday, the results are slightly different just because it's in a different mood or whatever it is. So I have like a testing framework that I created for myself. I have like a little worksheet. I have a way of evaluating things, and it's not a perfect science, but yes, I try to come up with a test protocol. Like, for example, like, I'm doing thematic analysis, and I want to see which of these tools does it best for me based on the level of granularity I need, which is closest to my manual analysis. And I will go through with 3 or 5 different sets of interview transcripts and apply the same sequence of prompts in all of them, kind of side by side, or one day after the next, depending on how long it takes.
Yeah, thank you. One shout out to the audience. I already see that a bunch of you started liking questions. I think it's a great way. I don't have an upvoting
Cool.
system in StreamYard, but if you like a question that somebody put in there, please put a like. And I know that if I see a high number, then it's something that many people are interested in. So you help my job and Caitlin's in the end to tackle those questions. All right. Let's talk about the opposite experiences, devastating experiences. Are there any areas in the product discovery where you say, like, hey, stay away. Just don't go for AI when you do this because it's not there, or
Yeah.
other reasons?
I think it's not so much it's not there as be careful when you just don't know what you're doing. I think, like, one way that I think people are making a really big mistake with AI is trying to use it to replace themselves in tasks or processes where they are not an expert. There's this idea, like I was just saying, around pricing questions, like writing an interview protocol for pricing or repackaging research, which has a huge effect potentially on my client, either positive or negative. If they redesign their service tiers based on the research I did, and it's not a good idea, like the way that they do it, or what I've found is not truthful, not accurate, and leads them down the wrong direction, that has a huge business impact for them that's negative. So I have to be careful there. I used it for that because I'm quite experienced in that. I'm not the world's top expert, but I'm pretty experienced. I have experience in that. I see a lot of product teams and design teams, especially, with people who've done some research, but not a lot, not a ton, not enough for me to say you're really an expert at interviews, for example, overusing AI or getting very excited about the promise of AI to kind of replace themselves in these effort-heavy research processes. But they don't always know what good looks like. They don't know how to be a really reasonable judge of the output quality.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where we just need to be careful. I haven't personally had any really devastating experiences, maybe partly because I'm a little bit cautious. Like, I know where I'm not an expert, and I'm not going to use AI to do those tasks for me and risk getting it really
And
wrong.
you're also senior, right? You have something to compare
Yeah.
AI results with from your past experience and past projects.
Yeah. So there's a lot of like built up experience and kind of product sense or customer sense for me. So if you personally don't feel like you have that, it's going to be a lot riskier for you to use AI in certain processes where you can't be a good judge. And I would say that's the biggest kind of risk of devastation in my book. But the other thing that I would say is I did a study around AI moderators in November and December. So I tested kind of semi-publicly. I shared the report with my newsletter and all the people who participated. So I had over 60 participants testing 5 AI moderation tools with me. So they basically chatted or talked out loud with a bot. And some of the results there on the devastating side were that a few participants, it wasn't a lot, but a few participants had an experience where they felt that it was a little jarring. It was a little uncomfortable kind of recording their voice, but speaking to a screen and not having a human there responding to them. And the responses, the follow-up questions they were getting from the AI moderators sometimes felt like they weren't really listened to. It was just an automatic bot-like response going, you mentioned X, and then having some sort of very templatized response. So I think we have to be careful there. I mean, most people are still not using AI moderators. This still feels very out there for a lot of people. But I think as more people warm up to the idea, we have to be careful about the situations we use those tools in and how our customers are likely feeling in the moments when we serve them with a bot to have a chat with instead of a human being.
Yeah, I ran an interview study, like 10 interviews in the last 2-3 weeks, and it was for a health tech company. Interestingly enough, and this is not something that I explored, but multiple people commented on how great the customer service was. And in particularly, they hated the chatbot, not their chatbot, but chatbots in general. They said they never solve your problem, they waste your time. But as soon as they got to a human being, they were blown away by the positive experience. And then so what you mentioned there is this feeling of awkwardness to interact with an AI. I think what I've experienced and seen is that it already starts with a chatbot when you click on the little icon on any website, with a lot of people having the immediate assumption that, okay, I'm just wasting my time here because ultimately this is an engaging FAQ, but they're not going to really be able to solve my problem.
Exactly. And I mean, even if we're already framing the situation for someone as like, this is how you can give us constructive feedback for how we can improve our app or whatever it is, it's still a matter of, okay, how frustrating has the experience been for that person when you're asking them to give you feedback in this way? Is it really better to serve them this kind of interface, this interaction, or like, should a human being actually follow up with them? Is there a risk of churn? Are they extremely upset? Have they had a really irritating experience over multiple touch points with you so far? You know, we have to consider those things and whether AI is appropriate from a more human perspective and not just like quantifying time as an ROI and things like that.
Yeah. Caitlin, you already alluded a few times about having some sort of an approach to test AI tools. And I would love to dig into that, because I think anybody out there who's thinking about, shall I use tool A or B, for them having a playbook or a blueprint from someone like you, it would be extremely valuable. How to think about, is this a good result that I'm getting? How can I measure trustworthiness of the tool? So let's talk a little bit about that. When you see a new tool, let's say you close your laptop, this webinar is over tomorrow morning. You open it, and bam, there's a new tool that you want to test. How do you think about the steps that you do in these testings?
I try to think about what I would want out of it. If, you know, what would I be trying to get out of it? What would my client want out of it if I were doing this myself? So I always start like with, you know, what would a baseline, a kind of control look like here? I ask myself if I could do that. Like, could I do, for example, the manual analysis? How long would it take? Because then I have a more reliable kind of control to weigh everything against. That would be a better experiment, right? But time doesn't always allow for that. Sometimes I'm just testing 10 note takers in a week and I want to choose one, and I kind of need to be able to just evaluate them against each other and my initial expectations. But, you know, like you mentioned trustworthiness, and I think I advise a handful of AI founders right now who are making user research tools. And the question that comes up all the time is like, how can we improve or increase trustworthiness among people doing research? I think trustworthiness is made up of a few parts. So within my framework, some of the things that I try to measure in a kind of percentage or a rating scale are accuracy. So did I find hallucinations? If so, how many? Like, of all of the observations, what percentage was hallucinated, or what percentage of quotes was, unattributable to a participant. The depth, was it deep enough that I could say, yes, I trust this because there is the level of detail I would have found on my own that backs up the claims enough that I can rely on it, that sort of thing. What else? Accuracy, depth. I think like depth kind of correlates with quality to me, because when I hear other researchers talk about like, well, how can you be sure that the quality is high enough? It usually has to do with getting beyond superficial insights and analysis, for example, getting the details that a human combing through the data bit by bit will actually uncover, and making new connections. So the depth is really important to me, and I'm really clear on the level of depth that I am capable of digging out of data. So I've kind of decided it's like an 8 or a 9 out of 10 typically. And so I actually use that in prompts, like trying to get it to understand what an 8 out of 10 looks like and dig out themes and analysis that matches that.
If someone is, let's say a junior researcher, somebody who has just started, is listening to our conversation, they don't have your amazing track record, right, that they can compare against. They have their bright mind. And what would your advice be to them if you're new in the user research scene, and you don't have that experience that you can compare and double check against?
I still, like, I know that AI has become so dominant that it feels like some previous skills like coding or whatever, it feels like you could just throw them out the window. You don't need them anymore. But I actually think that if you really want to use AI in customer research processes, whether you want to found a company that is obviously based on deep customer understanding so you can solve problems that haven't been solved before, or you want to work in some kind of design or research role, I think you really still need to hone those skills, like develop your craft. Because I have a hard time seeing where junior people fit in where AI is taking such a dominant role. I think you kind of need to be able to accelerate your own skill development without AI in the equation. Understand what a good interview looks like. Understand how to analyze your data in ways that are reliable and deep enough to make real business decisions on. Like, find a few points like that are just kind of key stepping stones to then be able to use AI, because you can evaluate it.
Yeah. The last point on the agenda are skills that you need to be a good user of AI tools. Now, I saw a bunch of questions related to that. So how about we transfer to the Q&A part, and I'm going to start throwing balls at you at light speed. No, jokes aside. There are so many questions. I try to merge them together for Caitlin. Okay, and then we try to cover them. And the first major topic that popped up early in the conversation is related to prompting. And the questions relate to what is important to consider when you want to create a good prompt.
Yeah. I would say, so there are a lot of YouTube videos. Like, quite honestly, you can learn how to prompt pretty well for free on YouTube. For complex tasks, though, and I would say, for example, doing research analysis is a complex task because it is a multi-step task. If you are doing thematic analysis, you're starting by familiarizing yourself with the content, then you're coding it, and then you're getting into themes, and then you're looking for sub-themes, right? You're like finding different ways to group things. Do these things belong together or that way? In what kind of level of categorization are we making here? And then you're fitting them maybe into back under the hood of whatever your research objectives were or the specific outcomes you needed. So that's many steps. And so just generally, I always recommend using chain of thought prompting, which breaks everything down into multiple steps so that AI doesn't get overwhelmed by you throwing everything into the world's longest single prompt. That across the board works better.
Could
So,
you explain what chain of thought prompting is and how that works?
so instead of trying to tell AI, so I want you to do thematic analysis, and here's my set of transcripts or whatever. I want you to do these tasks 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Please keep these guidelines in mind 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Format it like this in a table first, and then follow that by a structured text using these headings and so on. That's a lot of information. I always recommend that, you think about how common this analogy is, saying, well, AI is like an assistant, or it's like an intern, or it's like a junior level team member. I think that's actually quite accurate, because you're working with someone who's like kind of a librarian of the internet's knowledge, but doesn't actually know what good looks like, doesn't know exactly what you have in mind when you tell it to do a task. So you need to break it down for them. And if you can kind of break your complex task into bite-sized bits and really spell out, like, first you're going to do this one, and then when you're done with that, you bring it back to me and we're going to look at it together, and then I'll tell you what the next step is. It makes
Hmm.
it much easier for AI, just like a junior person without a lot of experience, to, instead of trying to like remember all the details and then forget half of them on their way out of your office or whatever, you do one thing at a time, and therefore it can do everything more thoroughly. That's the overall win at
Yeah.
the end.
When we talk about specific approaches, Yash mentioned the race framework. Do you have any experience with that? Any thoughts that you can
I
share?
use more specific information. So I don't just do, I mean, role, I pretty much always use a role, at least for the first prompt in a chain of thought prompt. The task, I mean, I usually put the context first. I find that works better. So, and in context, there's like multiple pieces of information. So if I'm using it for research specifically, I want it to understand what the research objectives were, a little bit of background information, like where is the company right now? Why did we decide to do this research? What do we already know maybe about this audience or whatever we're trying to understand more deeply? So there's like more than just, when you see tutorials for using ChatGPT to write copy or a LinkedIn post, it's pretty straightforward and you can use that framework. But if you're doing more complex research tasks, I think you need to include multiple kind of pieces of information within the context, not just like a two-liner. And then I always include format, because it makes the output just much easier for me to kind of copy paste and use directly. What else? I usually add guidelines around what good looks like. So, an example, like I mentioned before, like with thematic analysis, and like you need to deliver me themes and sub themes on an 8 out of 10 level of granularity, things like that.
Yeah.
Like good equals
Almost like
this
acceptance
deep.
criteria. No, like
Yeah,
acceptance criteria for Jira
very
tickets.
much. Like
Yeah.
what is good? If you tell it, I need you to deliver me detailed insights on churned customers, like, what is detailed? What does that mean to you? What are the acceptance criteria to tell it whether the detail was on the right level or not? So those are the kind of things that I think about. And that's why I said earlier that I think, so coming back to skills, I think if you don't feel that you're a clear thinker, learn to be a clear thinker. Learn to break down your own thought process and document it, because that's kind of the groundwork for writing good prompts for AI.
Yeah. Yeah. One point from Jamie I want to bring here, and this is a longer comment from, but what I'd like to pick up in here is this very deep contextual understanding of an experienced researcher around the users, the customers of a company, which you may not put in a general prompt or in the discussion guide, because it's just known out there. So, but AI lacks
Sure.
this additional perspective. How do you go about that? What do you do with this?
So I I pretty much never recommend that, like, even if someone is an expert researcher and they're a clear thinker and they kind of like check all the boxes I've just mentioned, I don't really recommend that they suddenly decide to replace themselves in every step of research. I think that's a recipe for disaster. I'm not doing that. I mean, I am doing research with AI all the time. I'm pretty much still involved in all of the steps. I don't go, here, AI, please do everything for me. Because I think that's right. I think, especially if you've worked in one business industry or one company for a long time, you have a kind of sense of the customer that you can't just get from feeding data into an algorithm and having it spit out the patterns it notices. On the other hand, I mean, there's a lot of benchmarking tests out there of large language models that show what kind of
Yeah.
tasks AI excels at and which ones it doesn't. And on the quantitative side, I mean, tests have shown recently that it performs better than, junior and mid-level data analysts, for example, and it's only kind of outperformed by the top experts by like 2% or something like that. So I think it's not fair actually to say that, like, when people, I'm not saying that quote said this, but a lot of people are like, AI can't do research like a researcher, and it's like, which research and which researcher? Because you can't really just have a blanket statement like that. So my more direct answer to that is yes, like, keep yourself in the research, please, because I'm not removing myself from the research. When I'm
Yeah.
using AI to support me in the analysis process, it's like I've done the interviews, or someone working with me has done the interviews. They have been in the sessions, they have a gut feeling a little bit for how they went, what the vibe was. They can skim
Yeah.
through the things that AI spits out and say, I feel like it's missing something. Like, there was this little bit that I feel like I recall from a few sessions, and I don't think that AI got that.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
And all those facial expressions now and change of tone that you may notice, but AI doesn't
yeah,
necessarily pick it up from the transcript.
yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. All right. Let's name the elephant in the room. Privacy. Uh,
Yeah,
I'm sure you mentioned that you asked the consent of your client to use
yeah.
AI for finding themes. How do you work? How do you manage privacy of using AI tools?
I mean, I anonymize everything I can. I mean, I think this is a pretty standard step in research when you're working as a research. So that doesn't feel like strange or new around AI. I'm more cautious. I think harder about whether, like, I've used temporary chat or like disabled certain settings in ChatGPT or Claude to make sure that everything is private. Or I ask, if I'm working with a team for a longer period of time, I ask for access to whatever tools they're using, like the model that they have a corporate license with, because that is automatically more secure. There are agreements blocking OpenAI from pulling that data into their model training. So I always ask. I mean, I have a very clear disclaimer, or like confidentiality, and kind of request for consent around AI, even when someone just books like one chat with me. That's like right there saying, I use an AI note taker. Like, I need you to know that. So I think we have to ask for permission. The space where I think it's getting a little hazy and it feels difficult, like, as the researcher, it feels difficult to add more and more information disclosing the use of AI in every interaction with, like, my clients' customers, or coaching, my clients to do that, even though that's the most ethical practice. Like, putting everywhere to
Yeah.
telling their customers everywhere, like, we're using AI more and more in all of these processes, and trying to spell out where that is. I think from the participant's perspective, it feels really scary and starts to feel overwhelming. I think it will become
Yeah.
more and more normal, but we're at this moment where we have to do that to be really ethical, and it's not without friction.
Yeah. And for me to understand here, if you take, let's not talk about your example, but if we feed information transcripts into AI, do they do these providers use that information to train their models? Am I like passing, even if I anonymize it, am I passing on some valuable knowledge that I from my company and just publish it in a way?
If you don't have certain settings on, I don't trust it not to use it. So like I use temporary chat in ChatGPT. I actually don't use ChatGPT for a lot of certain research
Mm,
processes with my clients' data because I have a lower trust in OpenAI based on their kind of philosophy around their development of AI. I trust Anthropic, the maker of Claude, a lot more. But generally, you should always look at the settings you have in your profile and what their privacy policies say about their use of your data. I think the one thing I would say is that when most of us work with companies that have connected a lot of SaaS tools, like there are lots of third party operators already using your companies and your clients' data in lots of data transactions all over the place. So I think it's, yeah, the question you phrased is more about the training of the model, which I think is the most relevant part of it, but people kind of
yeah.
talk about it more generally about like the data leaking and things like that. I think there's already a lot of data being transferred all over the place. Just always check the settings, always check the privacy policies. That's like my best recommendation. Familiarize yourself with the language that the large language model you're using uses in their privacy policies about where your data is going, in which cases they're using your data, because there are all of these little kind of fine details about how if they feel that you have breached some, I don't know, some rule, or they think that your prompting is triggering AI to respond in racist ways or something that is questionable and against their ethical policies, then they have the right to use your data in some way to like double check things. And yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna take a last question, and I apologize to everyone who didn't get their
Oof.
questions answered. There's a lot, and I'll try to find an efficient way to channel them to Caitlin and hope that she can. We'll think about something, Caitlin. Okay, we can talk about that offline. But for now, let's talk about Hamad's question about the massive layoffs in Silicon Valley. I think that's everyone observed it in the last 12 plus months, how many UX research, not just individual roles, but complete teams got slashed and
Yeah.
fired on short notice. Um, where do you see the future of the UX jobs?
I'll start by saying I'm not a, like a human resources professional or like in the hiring realm. So I think my knowledge and my ability to talk to this is really limited. But if I have to make predictions or kind of based on the people that I talk to who are in more like senior hiring positions, I think that the development of both design and research within UX, right, is going in the direction of, I don't know, being a little bit more like generalist. This is my sense of things. Because of AI filling in gaps, it's kind of like it's presenting a strange realm, like I said before, of going into areas where maybe people are using AI for things that they're not experts in to fill the gaps. But that's also, I don't know, almost becoming more expected because it's like, oh, you don't need this skill anymore because you can just have AI do it, right? So an extreme version, like we only need a UX UI designer because we don't need to use a researcher because they can just do the research and have AI analyze it now, right? Whew, wrong, because they aren't an expert at research and they don't know what good looks like, and you're not going to have any really solid research insights that develop the business in the right way, potentially. But that's what I see happening. There's like, I get requests from design teams looking to train their researchers, right? Because they're trying to fill in their research gaps and then also see where they can use AI to like fill in other gaps everywhere. And research teams are like doing more prototyping and yeah, almost like maybe move less so, but maybe moving in the other direction. Yeah.
All right. So if you're junior researcher, maybe pick up some design skills on the side. No, just It's not an easy
up your
spot.
research game.
Yeah.
Yeah, up your research game as quickly as you can. I mean, as someone who comes from design too, I think design skills are always really valuable. Also as a researcher, like I have many times done prototyping, done some scrappy views very quickly because a designer wasn't available, and that worked out.
All right. Caitlin, I'm eternally thankful for all the wisdom that you shared, and I'm equally thankful to everyone in the audience. You've been amazing. There are so many questions, and I feel so sorry that we couldn't cover everything. I promise I'll find a way to pick up these discussion points in one way or another. So bear with me on that. Again, this session has been recorded. I'm going to put it on our YouTube and Spotify. I just put the links again. If you want to mark it for yourself, you can get the recording sometime tomorrow. In the meantime, I wish all of you a very nice evening or rest of the day, depending on where you're tuning in from. Caitlin, again, thanks so much for being here with me.
Thank you, and thanks everyone for joining. Really good questions.
Take care, everyone. Ciao, ciao.
Bye.